My name is Imad Riachi. I'll be giving a session on data-driven decision making. My aim is to make this session as interactive as possible. So I've only prepared kind of a couple of slides, but I would really like to be driving the conversation from like questions that you guys have, concerns that you have, or whether you want to know stuff. I'll try to answer things kind of as much as I can. I would also encourage other people in the room, because I do know kind of there are quite a few of you that I can already recognize who work in businesses which involve processing a lot of data as well. So I would also encourage these guys to stand up, or kind of if they have any kind of comment, just to say what they have on their mind. All right, so just a couple of slides to start with. Just to introduce myself. So I've been working in big data and in algorithms in AI for quite a while now. I did my studies in robotics, did my PhD in neuroscience, worked in quantitative strategy at GS, had a small stint at a startup where we were basically looking at processing the large amounts of data that comes from the trading of portfolio managers, trying to detect pattern of behavioral biases there that these guys might have. And I was fortunate enough, like a couple of months ago, to be offered a role within Facebook to lead their product analytics team in London. The reason why I'm showing this is just basically so that I just want to give a better idea of the path that I have taken. So I've worked in data in very different sectors. I've worked in data in science, I've worked in data in finance, I've worked with data in B2B businesses, in B2C businesses. And as different as these businesses are, and as different as these sectors are, there is some kind of similar pattern and some kind of best practices on how you can be really using the data that you can collect to drive better decision making. And these are kind of the things that I want to kind of very briefly touch on in a couple of slides. But I would really then kind of want to hear about your story, what are you guys working on, and what are the things that you would like to be discussing. So just in a few words. So data, why data? Data and big data has become quite a buzzword for the last few years. Any startup, and I think a lot of you would already know that, if you kind of put big data, machine learning, AI in your pitch, you kind of automatically get more interest from the VCs. Everyone's talking about this. You go on TechCrunch, you go on Wired, it's all over the place. The thing that I want to be talking about is about more specifics of why do we really need that. Data for the sake of data is bad, right? There's some terminologies that have come across the last few years, especially like the term data science, which I think is a particularly bad term to use. The reason for that is that actually data on its own doesn't lead you anywhere, right? Data science doesn't mean much because there's really no science that is done without data. Data is only kind of one part of the loop. And using this data-driven approach in science, as much as in business, can really give you an edge in what you're doing. So there's this very famous phrase where kind of you can't really manage what you cannot measure. Like if there's stuff that are happening that you just think are happening, but you can't measure them, you don't know, you cannot quantify them, then it's very hard to making decisions. It's very hard to be taking actions because you don't even know whether the action that you have taken has really had an impact or not. Data needs to be an integral part of that kind of feedback loop. It helps settle discussions and arguments internally in your startup a lot, right? People can have different opinions. At some point, I think with Facebook at the very beginning, and Mark Zuckerberg would say, coding resolves conflicts. Actually, now the new motto is like data resolves conflicts. Different opinions is fine, but it's like data should always be the thing that you guys go back to. The other thing is that if you have constant monitoring, constant tracking of certain metrics, and I'll show a slide about kind of when I'm talking metrics or things that I'm alluding to, that allow you to be constantly have the pulse of your startup, right? So if, say, on a given day, like your sales skyrocket or completely plummet, you don't want to really learn about this by the end of the month when you're going through reviews, right? If you have a proper process, monitoring process in place, you do have dashboards that are constantly showing you what is happening, then that high velocity data gives you the chance to react ASAP and be able kind of to turn things around. Quick decisions is very highly valuable, especially in startup, where you need to be super efficient about the time that you're spending. You need to be super efficient about the amount of money that you're spending. And you are usually competing against some very big players. I love this small cartoon because the thing is, being data-driven is in no way a substitute for using intuition and good judgment. Actually, that data with bad judgment is as bad as not having data. It can actually be worse than that, right? So data-driven business does not mean, again, does not mean only use data, don't use your intuition. It actually means use your intuition on hard fact and evidence. All right, so this is data being one part of the loop. I think when you guys, especially in early stage startups, people tend to think of basically say, okay, so I'm going to launch this website, I'm going to launch this app, I launch it, and then I'll worry about data and collecting the information later. That is actually like a really bad thing to do. It's not a really bad thing because you cannot do it. It's actually a really bad thing because the way that you've already approached the problem is by thinking about the hard-based evidence as being secondary to your decision making, right? The right way of doing it is like usually start whenever you're starting to develop your product. If it's an app, right? I'm going to be measuring, say, how I am acquiring my customers. I want to exactly know where each customer is coming from. I want to know how they're interacting with my app. I want to know of those who end up on my app. Why is it, how many of those kind of end up clicking on the button and registering? How many of those end up putting the credit card details, right? Because unless you do have information about each part of the funnel, if I tell you that I've launched a campaign and I tried reaching 10,000 people and then only 10 signed up, it is really kind of almost no information. It might be that you're actually, all of them are getting to the very last point of your funnel, but then there's a bug in how you upload your credit card details, which is very different from basically saying no one is entering the funnel. So building this culture of data-driven decision-making in your startup early on is actually very interesting and is actually quite crucial. So only still kind of a couple of slides before kind of I turn to you guys to come up with the topics. So what kind of decisions can be more data-driven? Very, very, very early on, you guys have, say, a brilliant idea. I want to test, I don't know, some kind of, I'm coming up with this idea of a new scented soap that is kind of done the Lebanese traditional way. Great, excellent idea. How do you test that? How do you test the validity of your approach? Of course, you can go and kind of ask your family. You can go and ask your friends. You can use your intuition. Brilliant. But unless you can really prove to yourself and prove to the people who are going to end up putting their money in how that there is really demand for it, it's going to be virtually impossible. And the only way to be doing that is to go ahead and collect data. Collecting data doesn't mean that I need to be going and looking at the openly available data on the net. It could be as easy as writing a survey monkey survey, sending it over, looking at the responses. What is it that I'm getting back? Another way of doing it, which is, I know a couple of friends of mine who already done that. Like they had this idea of something that was kind of vaguely similar. And the way they tested the market is that they went on, they basically created a fake, not a fake website. You know, there are these websites that you can create for almost free, which is just like a one-pager, like a startup launch or launch rock, I forgot what its name is. So for completely free, but they end up basically investing $1,000 or something around this figure in Google AdWords. So they basically put on ads on Google to monitor how many people will end up actually when they see this click on it. It's one part of the story. People saying they're interested doesn't mean that they'll end up buying, but it gives you kind of a better picture, right? And this is also this is actually very important at the very early stages of a startup.
Is it like the Sifco scenario?
What's the cycle scenario?
On Facebook, real estate.
Yeah. So I don't know if in the Sifeco kind of example they were doing this to probe for market demand, but this is one way of doing it, definitely, right? And the more you can be creative around kind of how you're probing for this market demand and the places you're going to look for it, like so if you end up going say on Facebook or on Google, you might even kind of end up getting more information about the user who end up kind of clicking through, right? Is it going to be a population that's between 20 and 30 years old? Is it going to be basically teenagers? Is it females more than males? Is there anything that you haven't thought of that might end up, that is resulting in, say, the older chunk of the population being interested in it? All of these are very relevant insight this early on your startup when your product is still kind of not really well defined, right? So acquisition channels, again, one example is kind of the ads we were discussing. It can even kind of be as simple as like banner ads. It could be like offline ads, right? As long as you are collecting the data, you will get better information. I have a friend of mine in London who is working in one of the hottest actually startups in the property space. And they've actually, because they're constantly monitoring where their customers are coming from, they've basically decided that actually the best revenue on the money spent on advertising is not going to be Facebook, it's not going to be online stuff, it's going to be ads that they were putting in specific places in London on the tube, which were kind of regions where there were kind of high net worth individuals who would commute every day in the morning, right? Unless you have the data, there's no way you can see that. And you will end up spending also a lot of money kind of all over the place. It's like spray and pray. There's no reason to do that. Okay. That's a very interesting question. So one of the ways how you can measure ads on the street, simplest one that is not accurate is basically asking the customers that come in, so basically, where are you from? Where have you seen this? What's being referred to? Second thing is, if you end up using promotion codes, right? And I think you might already see that. If you have a different promotion code per place where you put it, so say if I'm in Beirut, it's going to be basically hashtag my super soap company 123. If it's going to be somewhere else, it's going to be hashtag soap company 567. Right? Internally, you're the only one who kind of knows that mapping, and you know basically how many of those you've put. So you can kind of do kind of some simple math and kind of figure out kind of what's really being effective and what's not being effective. There are a lot of ways around it. Happy to discuss this kind of in a bit more detail. A/B testing for product features. All of you who've been or are currently in startup already know that one of the biggest debates we're going to have internally, because you have limited resources, is what is the next thing that you want to develop, right? And whether kind of it's going to be impactful or not. Sorry, how many people in this room know what A/B testing is? Okay, I'll explain it in one sentence. Basically, doing A/B testing is one way of figuring out what the impact of a given change is by doing something as simple as, say, I want to add a red button, or I want to color the button red on my website. For me to understand what the impact of that thing is on the website, what I end up doing is that I roll this change to 50%, say, of my population, and I keep it the same for the other ones. And then I compare the difference in the metrics and say how many people are end up pressing on this button across the two. So that's A/B testing, right? And A/B testing is actually the only way. Like I can tell you, like in Facebook, there's no product that goes anywhere. Not even product, not one feature that goes anywhere unless it's been A/B tested and has been proven to score positively on some key metrics. Nothing, like no intuition, no word from senior management, A/B testing. Other things you want to be looking at, user engagement. Knowing that many people opened that website or visited this website is like so 1990s. That's not enough. This is not enough information. What are these people doing? How many buttons are they clicking? What is the time that they're spending on this on the page, right? Are they spending money? Or are they referring people? All of these are much better, accurate representation of what user engagement is. Looking only at stuff like pages viewed is not enough. It's really not enough. Last thing is like user satisfaction. I think this is pretty self-explanatory, but it's there's this score. Who knows about the NPS, Net Promoter Score? A very simple, basically, feedback mechanism. Like if your users are using your services, you just ask them for how likely are you basically to, correct me if I'm wrong, how likely are you to recommend this to a friend, right? If the score is from 0 to 10, it's a positive score if it's usually between 8, 9, or 10, right? It's the simplest way to basically be able to probe for the user satisfaction. Okay, cool. Last slide. I just mentioned this before. I just want to quickly mention them again. These are the famous startup metrics. He's like Dave McClure. He's famous for putting forward these 5 metrics, whose abbreviation basically says R. So they call the pirate metrics. If there are only 5 things you want to measure in your startup, and I'm being very generic here, I'm overgeneralizing, but they're acquisition, how are the user finding you, right? Activation of the people who end up finding you, how many of them are really activating or are buying into your product, right? So if you're trying to sell something, them visiting your website is not enough. How many are really end up kind of buying? Retention, how many people who buy once come back and buy again? So that this is kind of the other facet of churn. So the best kind of users are users who have the longest, who have the highest lifetime value. So they will come again and again and again and again. Which user are these? If you have information about them when they're filling in their profile, then you can also basically be able to make conclusions, as in teenage girls are basically those who end up coming over and over and over again, right? Why is that? I know, like you will have to figure it out. This is why you need to use intuition, you need to use more data. But it helps you drive your product development further. Revenue, very obviously. How am I making my money? What kind of products? So if you're an e-shop, if you're selling multiple things, what are the things that are basically bringing in most of the revenue? Are these basically usually repeated sales? Are these kind of one-offs? Is it the same kind of users? Do I end up selling the thing, like when first time I put it up for sale, is there a novelty effect there that's fading away? If usually kind of most of my sales on a given product only happen the first week and then after that nothing happened, then basically you know that all of your customers are very novelty driven, right? So basically your product and what you need to be doing is basically changing like every single week, bringing in new stuff. So it's a bit the Zara model versus the H&M model, right? And then referral. Referral is a very interesting one. And after that, I mean, I want to open the floor for questions. And depending on if you have time or not, I might do a small case study on referral. People who have startups here would be able to tell you that referral is like the best thing ever because it comes for absolutely free, right? I mean, absolutely free unless you want to encourage it and kind of give people discounts. But usually the best way to get you to use something is having a friend recommend this to you, right? And building into your application or to your website a system that makes referral easy or encourages referral might be the key to making your product viral, right? Because if every user on average ends up referring more than one person, this is explosive growth, right? If everyone ends up recommending half a person, you do the math, you end up basically almost doubling your number of customers for completely free. Yeah, cool. Right. I'm going to stop here for a second. I want to ask first if there are any questions. Questions? Yeah.
Hi. Actually, it's just I noticed that you were talking about if you wanted to know the acquisition channel of a client, if you wanted to know the efficiency of the offline ads, asking for user input is somewhat inefficient. So through your experience, do you think that this is a very inefficient way of measuring this? Is it reliable in any way?
Here's the thing. The thing with data as in tech world, as in any kind of other scientific experiment you're doing, you go with the most accurate data you can get, right? So if this data or nothing is the all you can get, I'll get that data any day. That being said, I'm not that skeptic in this given example, like of using users' feedback to identify what the acquisition, if for offline acquisitions, especially if you're designing your offline campaign in such a way that you can basically backtrace it, right? In other places, okay, so here's an example where it's very tricky. And this is where kind of experience in coming up with good user surveys comes in very handy. You will almost never get an accurate estimate of the number of people who want to buy your product if you come up with a survey basically asking, would you buy this product, right? So if you get 50% of people saying, I will end up buying the product, most likely, in the best case scenario, a third of these might end up buying it, right? If you go and you search online, there are kind of, people have done a lot of this in the past. There have been studies around it. People might come up with factors which are kind of rules of thumb, as in out of 50%, 50 people or 100 people who want to say they're going to buy, like say 50% of them buy, you will find these everywhere. I'd be very skeptic about it, but basically get the best data you can get and design as well as you can to be able to stop these biases from happening.
I have two questions. Can you hack anyone's Facebook account? I'm serious. I don't know. Okay. The list that you give us there, what is the most important if you had to pick one? And tell us why.
Sounds like a Miss Lebanon kind of question. So the Facebook thing, I'm not here speaking officially as representing Facebook, but I believe the security model of people kind of hacking to Facebook has been already proven along, like for the past years. So I'll leave it to that. Which one of these would I pick? Honestly, it will really depend on the stage of my startup, and it really depend on the type of startup I have. If I were at the growth stage, what I believe I'll be really looking into is, and if I still haven't started attempting a viral campaign, it would definitely be referrals. If I'm at the very, very early stages, it's definitely going to be kind of these two here.
You mentioned that we should rely on our intuition when analyzing data rather than AI. But for example, when Facebook ads, they give us suggestions on improving our conversions, or when Google AdWords or analytics give us suggestions, should we go with these suggestions or rely on our own experience and our own intuition when solving such problems?
First, A/B testing. That's my answer to you, right? So I would actually, like, I'm giving you my own medicine basically. So it's like I think by all means try both and see, like do a control group, like half this way, half that, or kind of a week this, a week that, a week this, a week that is less accurate because of all the other things that can happen. That being said, I just want to be, I don't know if the message came across wrong. I did not say do not use AI or kind of use your intuition instead of that. I'm just saying do not just use data as is, or do not just take anything for granted, right? And your intuition should be shaped by the data. The analytics of the data should be shaped by your intuition. Like the worst kind of data scientist or product analyst you can get are, I don't want to offend anyone, but are people who would be coming out with, say, PhDs in hardcore math or physics and don't know anything about the product, right? Because it's not about the numbers, it's about what you make of the numbers and how you interpret them. And it's the same thing in any kind of science discipline you're in. You need to have, the best way of doing your experiment is starting with a hypothesis, doing the mind experiment, as they call it in physics. If this hypothesis would to be true, what is the outcome I'm expecting? If that would to be true, what outcome am I expecting? Do that exercise first before you even launch your experiment, and then collect the data and interpret it accordingly.
With your experience, people who work in like strategists for Facebook, Google, they need special skills in data while explaining to their clients, like the companies from SMEs to big clients, in sales, negotiation, explaining the data. What do you believe are the best resources for people who are looking for this specific career path? Is it SEO? Is it SEM? Is it, I mean, it's a lot of things.
Like all the data scientists I worked with, no one kind of basically took as a career path SEO or SEM, because SEO and SEM is just one manifestation of how you're using your skills, right? Like if you're a good data scientist, I will leave my rant about the data scientist term for another presentation, but let's just use it for now. So if you're a good data scientist, like if it's SEO, SEM, or if it's like coming up with analytics on the sales patterns in a given country, you would be able to do the same thing as long as you follow the scientific discipline of using the data in a proper way. Honestly, like that's what I would say. That's a good question. If you want, I'm happy to have that conversation offline. I don't have it off the top of my head. Usually, like what I would say is, like pick a problem you're interested in solving, read about it, see what tools are out there. There are already some tools that kind of do a lot of the job for you, but they're not. They shouldn't be also replacing your skills and you being able to do judgment on data. But I'm happy to send you a list of the resources.
Thank you. Facebook, in terms of the volumes of data that it owns, is unrivaled only by Google and maybe Visa. So with that amount of information, how can Facebook help startups use that data for whatever? And this is aside from ads and the APIs that Facebook already provides.
So can you give me an example of what is the top of mind? So what are places that you think can help people just for me to get understanding?
Behavioral of customers, potential customers, yeah. Segmentation, behavioral.
Again, I'm just a bit reluctant to be answering all the questions about Facebook, but since this one came up, I'm more happy to answer it. It's a fine line that we're playing with, like in big companies like Facebook, because there's user privacy is very, very important, right? I don't think, and it will never happen, that a company that works in social networks will end up sharing a lot of information about the behavior of the people on their own network. The best they might be able to do is basically through places like ads and APIs, not APIs, just like ads, suggesting the people who would be the best people to see your ads. I really don't think that it would go beyond that, because then it creates all sorts of tensions internally, which actually, which compromise the core of what that business is. Like if you end up doing this, people don't feel comfortable doing the stuff that they're doing. It's not a social media, it's a social network anymore. It defeats the purpose. Yeah. Sorry, just a sec.
Thank you. I want to ask about your opinion about when it goes to Goldman Sachs financial markets. So you have this model that you build to set aside your own judgments and your own emotions. Now, how would you judge, how would you deal with the fact that you see something that doesn't make sense on the data, doesn't make sense for you, but the data is telling you that it's a good investment? Would you risk it?
It depends if I build the model or not. No, it's a very good question. And this is exactly why I've really made it a point, as in, don't blindly follow what the data is telling you. Not to take that conversation in a very technical path, but very well-designed algorithms should be able to tell you why is it that they've taken that decision. It's not the practice, as in like the current practice in everywhere, but well-designed algorithms by people who like have a firm understanding of the reason and objective of that algorithm should be able to output as part of the result the reasoning that led to the result. That being said, so that would be kind of my answer to that. So if I'm designing usually algorithms, that's what I do. I know why, because, and it depends, and there are some kinds of algorithms which make it possible. There's some kind of algorithm known as black box algorithms, which are kind of very heavy on machine learning, stats, kind of hidden layers, anyway. Like it's a bunch of buzzwords, which make it almost impossible, which then makes it, which is a very interesting then conversation to have early on. Would I want to have a super accurate thing that would most likely kind of fail 1% of the time, where I don't understand, or maybe 0.5%, where I don't really understand how it's coming up with this number? Or would I rather have something that might fail 10% of the time, but where it's telling me every single time how it's getting to its result? I would personally choose the latter over the former every day. That's a personal preference. It depends. It's up for discussion. Anyone else?
You mentioned machine learning. I would like to know, do you use machine learning to know what type of ads, or use that as a metric to what type of character, like what are the people looking for? Like, do you use that or not at all?
Okay, I'm going to do a disclaimer. I really don't work in the ads side of business in Facebook, but generally speaking, from my knowledge of things, yes, there are machine learning algorithms. Machine learning there ranges. Machine learning is just like a wide spectrum. It can be from anything from just having maximum likelihood model, which is just like a simple equation, to something which needs a supercomputer to train for kind of 5 days to get up with an answer, right? And the term is very loosely used. Yes, anything that has to do with association or coming up with answers based on a wealth of data is usually kind of put under machine learning, but I wouldn't be. I'm pretty sure that 90% of the models or 80% of the models used in the industry are very simple. They're just kind of simple Bayesian models, like nothing more than that. Yeah, yeah. So.
Okay, so I'm sorry to be asking about Facebook, but it's very data related. Yeah, very much. So when we measure the ads on Facebook, what we get when we get the results out of our ads, it's usually in absolute figures. So, for example, you've reached 1,000 persons, and let's say 100 interacted with you or engaged with the ad. But isn't it more relevant to put it in terms of relative, for example, like a 10% engagement rate for your ad of the reach? If you reach 10,000 people and 1,000 engaged with your ad, right? This is very easy to compute, but usually it's they're bigger numbers, or they're not as rounded as 10,000 and 1,000. Is there any rationale for having absolute figures instead of relative figures?
I have not myself used that part of the product, but answering your question in a more general way, I'm sorry, but it's going to be the it depends answer, right? Like if you're actually looking, if they're showing you the absolute numbers so that they justify the amount that they're ending up kind of charging you at the end of the day, because you've got kind of 1,000 interaction and each interaction is like, like $5, then they're not going to say it's 10% at $5 and so it's going to be $5,000, right? At the end of the day, I think, again, like the data is given to you and you need to put it in a shape that makes most sense for you. In your case, yes, definitely it's going to be 10%, but also you need to be very careful about what 10% mean. It's 10% of the reach of people who this ad has been targeted towards, right? It's not 10% of everyone who would ever see that ad, regardless of whether they were targeted or not. So you also need to be using this with a pinch of salt. Yeah. Any other questions? John? Is it about Facebook? You can ask about both.
I'm bored of Facebook. Right now, the way that we measure things is always about click-throughs. Okay? There's always a button, you click it, yes, no, very binary. Being the professor of data science that you are there any other interactions or things that you think about, or non-binary things? not even button level. Like you can start with a button and other things, but how can we change from just click, no click, click, no click?
Okay, so a very interesting question. Really now? So maybe I just want to, can we, anyway, it's fine, no worries. First, I just want to start by basically explaining one thing about binary events. Yes, they're boring. The good thing about them is they're actually more robust to noise, right? So trying to measure something as an, oh, like he was thinking about clicking this button is supposing that there is an easy way of measuring that is not going to give you a hard enough signal to be able to make a decision on. And you're usually going to be looking for robust signals in the wealth of data that you have. Binary is actually kind of a good way of doing that. That being said, I'm trying to think of other ways of doing. So, okay, so one example of non-binary, but which is not used across the board, is in people who are actually looking for, you know, like the P2P loans. So if you actually want, like platforms like Wonga, where you can just kind of go online, you can register and ask for a loan that you would return, like they're like usually sub 2,000, 3,000 pounds, $5,000. They just ask you, say, to fill in a form, and then you get the reply immediately. So people there kind of tend to look at how you are interacting with the website, not just basically how you're clicking through. They look at how much is it going to take you to basically be filling in the fields. How much are you hesitating? What is your mouse doing? What is the patterns of how you're kind of clicking on your keyboard look like? And all of these go into sophisticated, I mean, that's what they say, I think sophisticated algorithms that end up trying to detect fraudulent interactions versus non-fraudulent interactions. So the easiest other thing is just like looking, again, like the time spent and how much people are spending doing stuff. That's one way of looking at it. Face expression. The face expression thing is still kind of very, very experimental. People have been experimenting. So some website, sorry, there are actually startups where you go to these startups and you ask them about how are users using my website. Which parts of my website are working well, which parts are not working well. And what they do is that they actually put some users, so a specific user research, in front of cameras, and they track where their eyes are looking, and they basically also look at their emotions as you're showing them different things, and they basically end up delivering a report on how this, on the user's journey and how they're interacting with the platform. That being said, I have a very hard time thinking of this as being rolled out to everyone. I think it will still be used just on the research bit, because it's, yeah, I mean, you cannot expect people to turn their webcam on while they're browsing and working on a website. No. Any other questions? Okay, if there are no other questions, then I might just kind of show one slide. Yeah? Sorry, did you have a? Yes, yes. CPA. All right, just one. No one can read this, right? You can. There's something below it. Fine, excellent. So I spoke about designing a viral campaign. So ideally, in the viral campaign, what you're looking for is that every user that you have is going to end up referring at least one person on average, right? Simple math, if this happens, then kind of this thing is bound to grow forever. It's not going to grow forever, of course, but still. As long as you have a K factor that's bigger than 1, your network is going to keep growing exponentially. The way that this K factor is usually computed is, let me take an example. So in the case of the users are, so here's the scenario. The users can go online into their profiles, select their friends, and then send these friends an email to go on my website, which is, again, like this website that sells soap, okay? So how do you compute the K factor for my campaign? How do I compute going from one user sending, like referring, to, for each user I have, to basically how many people is he bringing on board? There are multiple parameters in this equation. One, what percentage of the users that I have are going to end up referring their friends, right? Number two, what percentage, sorry, what percentage is going to invite? How many persons are they going to invite on average, right? Of these people that are going to invite, what is the percentage of those that are going to open the email? Of those that are going to open the email, what percentage of these are going to end up going to the website? And of those, what percentage of those are going to end up buying or kind of becoming a user, depending on where you want to stop it. Let's say kind of want to go just up, they activate or they kind of sign up. If you see, like, so there are kind of 5 or 6 different stages to get to that last point. You need to multiply all of them, right? And if you get a result that's bigger than 1, it means that basically the campaign that you have designed is viral, okay? If it's less than 1, again, it's not a bad thing. It can give you actually the number of how many people is one user bringing. But if you want to make it viral. Now, the important thing in all of that is not just the maths per se. The important thing in that is that by decomposing that virality factor, you actually now have levers that you can really be working on individually, right? Because if you then look at the equations that you have, and you're like, okay, hold on a second. Like, if I want to get my K factor to something that's bigger than 1, what is the easiest intervention that I can do? Easiest intervention doesn't necessarily mean that I can just pick a metric randomly and just take it up by 10%. It also kind of depends on which metrics can you really action on as easily as possible, right? If, say, not a lot of people are inviting, is there something there that can be done into kind of, for every person that you bring will end up giving you a discount? What if kind of a lot of people are inviting, but you're not, out of these friends who are receiving these emails, not a lot of them are replying? Is there something about the design of the email itself that I can make whenever you get referred by a friend to make it more attractive so that I can get that number up? Again, just a very simple example, and you can do this for every single one of those. And this is what data-driven decision-making is about, right? You have a quantifiable objective, which is that K factor. You have the levers. You know how to action each one of them, and then you need to basically decide where you're going to spend your effort to apply pressure to have that final impact that you're looking at for your K factor. Okay. No, I think I've already, okay. Yeah. Talking about analytics, you don't need a data scientist in-house to start looking at analytics. I want to just make this kind of very clear. There are a lot of tools that you can already be using off the shelf that would already give you some of the things that I'm talking about for free. Some of them might be for a small cost. By all means, I think it's a fully justifiable cost if you want to build in this data-driven culture in your company, right? I mean, it's not even a list. It's just basically just showing that there are things out there. Like Mixpanel, Localytics, you just put kind of small, what they call pixels on each page. It shows you how the users are going through each page in your funnel. How are they interacting with my app? What's working? What's not working? You don't have to build these in-house, right? Go look at Google. Sorry. They do similar stuff. It's not completely different. It's not completely different. No. Google Analytics, as you said, AdWords, ad analytics. Like for Facebook, for instance, like yes, there's the ads targeting. Facebook have, for instance, this thing where if you really have an understanding of the kind of users that you really like, who to you are kind of your power users who end up interacting the most with your app or with your website. Facebook has a tool called, I think, Audience Lookalike, where you can just basically upload the list of the emails of these persons who have interacted with your website, and it will find people similar to, which have profiles similar to these to advertise to, right? No one's asking you to go and crunch the numbers of all the Facebook users. There are already tools that are already kind of taking you 90% there if you're willing to do the extra effort to use them. Surveys like SurveyMonkey, yeah. Cool. Sorry, that was it. This is my email address, my personal email address. If anyone has any questions, I'd be more than happy to help out. If you have anything in particular that you want to discuss, I'm also around tomorrow. Please feel free to reach out. Thank you.